Welcome back again, Art History 2 students. I hope you are doing fantastically well. Today, as we talked about last time, we will be leaving the Renaissance and moving into the next time period, and that's going to be Baroque art, which lasts roughly 1600 to 1700. One of the interesting things about the Baroque is we're going to have to look at two styles of art. We're going to have to look at the style that is in southern Italy and Spain and France that they're actually using to promote the Roman Catholic Church, called Counter Reformation art, because it's counter the Reformation art of the North and the Protestant Reformation. And we're going to have the Northern style that shows up. The hallmark of this Italian Catholic Counter Reformation art is absolutely going to be Bernini and Bernini's beautiful kind of illusionistic space. And then we're going to look at some dark tenebrism, some different issues that allow for some more human creativity. But what's interesting then, for the first time in human history, we have two competing art movements going on at the same time, depending upon where you live and who your patron is. Rubens becomes the superstar artist of this age. He can work in both the North and the South as one of the favorite court painters all over Europe, especially in Spain. He's knighted in England, Spain, and I think also Flanders. So multiple knighthoods that show up. Now, as we left off last time, the reason why we're going to move to multiple styles is literally going to be this lovely individual here, the monk Martin Luther and his 95 Theses. That by posting those on the lovely church in Wittenberg, basically challenges the Pope. And the Pope sees it as a direct affront, excommunicates anyone who actually even reads Martin Luther, all the way up very close to the modern world. It was considered heresy just to read Martin Luther, even though today we accept what Martin Luther said really quickly, very quickly, like such things as the Bible guides the action, not the church. The Pope can make mistakes because he's human, that you can't sell other people's goodness to make you more good. And so all of these things are going to show up. And this is really what's going to promote the end of the Renaissance. Now, after Martin Luther and the trials and the excommunication, people are faced with a choice that are Roman Catholic. Do you stick with Martin Luther and becoming a manifest heretic and thrown out of the Roman Catholic Church and form your own movement, your Protestant movement, or another church that is literally based more closely on biblical teachings than all of the biblical teachings and the associated 1,000-year-old history of the church that is developed sometimes without biblical teachings supporting behind it? That's what Martin Luther was protesting. Or alternatively, do you follow the Roman Catholic Church and say, all right, I am going to accept? The vast majority of Europe is really split and torn because both sides make very logical points. You'll see in the northern aspect where Martin Luther is from. So we have in the Holy Roman Empire and in Germany, northern France, Belgium, England, Scotland, parts of Ireland. We're going to actually see this very quickly turn over into the Protestant Reformation, and these become reformers. So we're going to have things such as the Church of England, the Anglican Church, which is going to be a protest movement, the Lutherans, the idea of the Presbyterians, the Baptists. All these things are going to actually break off from the Roman Catholic Church, and they're going to lose about half of the money that's coming in from the sale of indulgences, because even the people in the Roman Catholic world don't necessarily believe the sale of indulgences now that it's been brought to their attention that basically there's no biblical teaching underpinning it. And so the church is strapped for cash. A war is going to break out between the North and the South, between the Protestants and the Roman Catholics. And this war has disaster conflicts. Eventually, the Protestants are going to win and march all the way down into Florence, just way down here, very much still in the Roman Catholic territory, even though not everyone converts down here, and eventually all the way down to Rome. And they go through the sack of Florence and the sack of Rome. And basically, a sack is when you take over a city. The Protestants, remember, these are Christians fighting other Christians on the basis of what biblical teaching teaches you for the eternal damnation or for the eternal salvation of your soul, depending if you choose wisely. When they get into Florence, this army rapes about 7,000 women in the first couple of weeks while they're there, and they kill about 10,000 civilians. There's only 70,000 people that live. That's 17,000 people that are brutally violated just in the first couple of weeks. The same thing happens in Rome. And so this humanistic confidence that we had, talking about one-upsmanship, we're God's highest creation, is absolutely called into question. And we are going to move past the Renaissance and the belief in that humanism and the belief in the classical world in terms of theology, in terms of kind of Neoplatonic thought that we saw out of Botticelli. We're going to move to a much more severe form of Christianity with the Inquisition and Roman Catholic art in the South. In the North, we're going to have a little bit more free play than what we did before as we look at Reformation or Protestant art. So the response to Protestant Reformation up north, remember, Protestant to reform, so they protest to reform the church, was actually that the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope is going to come up with this idea of what's called Counter Reformation art. It's going to counter the Reformation itself. And we are going to have two styles of art that develop then. In the green down here, luckily with this green right here, we are going to have the Counter Reformation art, the art that actually supports the Roman Catholic Church. Then we're going to have the Reformation art in the very top, some which supports no church, and we have much more middle-class patronage, much more about business and gilding. We'll also get some that challenges potentially both the Protestants and the Roman Catholics, as we will see in the Caravaggio. Now, the development of Renaissance, if we can actually do this, or if you can do this, you have a pretty good handle on how art has developed so far in the beginning of this course in art history too. This is basically the development of Renaissance up to Baroque art. So if we start off with the three Davids, so we have the same subject. Again, each was made when the city of Florence won a dominant battle against Siena. That's when you have the David versus Goliath story that shows up. So here we have 1440 David by Donatello. Remember, that is early Italian Renaissance. We have David about 70 or 80 years later, 1501 by Michelangelo. That is high Renaissance. And then we're going to have the Counter Reformation or Baroque art by Bernini, again, a little over 100 years ago, 1623 to 24. So what are the similarities and the differences? All right, so in this one, starting off with the David by Donatello, we have a very early conception trying to rebirth the spear bearer, but we don't quite have all the classical details. It feels very feminine. Good. Here we have the perfection of the classical on spear bearer, the calm, the balance, the perfection of the human body, still nude. And that was a challenge. Remember, they even covered it and censored it in the Renaissance. Good. Then we have the Baroque period. What's different about the Baroque art by Bernini? All right, it's highly interactive. It's emotional. It's theatrical. It's the first time we've really seen sculpture in this kind of context. We've seen some of those references going back to the ancient Greek world of the fall of the ancient Greek world and Hellenistic art and Laocoon's two sons. We've seen it a little bit in Da Vinci in The Last Supper, where you see the tragedy and the different emotions of tragedy that show up. But the first time we've seen this type of emotional outpouring, and that really is going to be one of the hallmark features of the Baroque. So in Italian Baroque art aesthetics, if you don't have these somewhere already, write them down. It is you're going to have idealized, perfect classical bodies. Look at the rip, the musculature, the contrapposto, the six-pack abs. They're remarkable. We're going to have the idea of movement. This is, in order to understand the sculpture, you literally do have to walk around and see it on all its different sides and how the light hits it. We're going to have the idea of the audience involved. He's looking over us, and so on some level, he's protecting us as we move around, whether we're in front or behind him. We're going to have what's called emotional humanism. So not one-upsmanship, but the idea that we are going to try to get humanism through the reaction, the experiential, the emotional consequences that different saints felt or what they experienced in their heroic moment. We're going to have largely Christian symbolism that's going to show up. Excellent. And perfect. Things are going to be theatrical. And so this is almost like a theater set piece that shows up. Now, as we look through those lovely Davids, we'll see, we saw this in Da Vinci as well, the importance of working out. And so please, please, if you're not on a workout regimen, try to get yourself on a workout regimen because it does all these things. It reduces your sick days. It makes you healthier. It boosts the happy chemicals in the brain. It improves self-confidence. It improves memory and learning. It improves your relaxation time. And it relaxes the strain on the eyes caused by artificial lighting or like all of us as students and as professors teaching on the computer all day. So there's these huge benefits that show up. I'd highly recommend, if you can figure it out in your schedule, the earlier you figure it out, the better for a long-term life. Now, the artist par excellence, who is for Counter-Reformation art that we have to study, is this individual right here, Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who lives from 1598 to 1680. No, a ripe old age, all the way up to the age of 82. He is recognized as a sculptural prodigy at age 8 for what he's doing. He also is a very bad man. So this is an artist behaving badly, as we'll see. He ordered the face cutting of an unfaithful mistress, so no one else would actually take her on as a lover as well. And he is the master of the Counter Reformation art. A few of his artworks right here. The baldacchino over St. Peter's. Baldacchino basically means canopy. So it's this canopy over the actual tomb of the first Pope, St. Peter here. That's in the Vatican, where I currently am. That's actually all the way on the far end. You can see the gold here all the way straight back. We can actually see the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, which is going to be a very controversial artwork. And even in terms of working on the colonnade, which is kind of a combination of ideas of Bernini and also Michelangelo. He's also very famous for doing fountain work. One of the things that shows up here is that he is a master of what we call installation art. So this is the first example that we have of installation art. And installation art is the idea where the artist or the performer does everything. The sculpture, the architecture, the painting, the movement, the choreography. And so this is Ecstasy of St. Teresa by 1651. It's Counter-Reformation, Baroque, and here are the art aesthetics of that particular time period. Note, they are the same as Baroque, really. We're just going to get darker aspects that go up north. We're going to have these absolutely idealized bodies. We're going to have movement. Look, it looks like the angel's almost carrying her up to heaven. Yes, I am.
Oh, I'm sorry, you busy?
I was taping a lecture for my students. Sorry, what do you got?
Hey, on my dime, yeah, I'm gonna try to trim the seed pads off the parade. I would love for that to happen, but we should share it. How much is it? I don't know. Let me know. We should share it all. I'm gonna take it, clean them up. I don't know what it does to you on the north end, but on the south. It doesn't. I have nothing. So when it drops down, I clean them up. Like I don't want to get anything else. He's just trying to reach the end of what he can. Okay. All right. Very interesting. Nope. Don't be.
And we're back. So this is the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, the Counter-Reformation Baroque aesthetics with the idealized bodies, the movement, the audience involved, emotional humanism. So it's really a spectacular artwork because this sculpture itself is 6.5 feet tall, weighs the better part of thousands of pounds, and literally is freestanding. So you literally could go here and walk underneath it. And it's really kind of remarkable. There's no strings. So it's almost an optical illusion on how do you make something so heavy just float in a manner that's kind of amazing. All right. The mythic vision that showed up with the Ecstasy of St. Teresa and where we get the story and the image from itself is right here. So this is St. Teresa's mystical own vision. Beside me appeared an angel in bodily form. In his hands, I saw a great golden spear, and at the steely tip there appeared to be a point of fire. This he plunged into my heart several times, so that it penetrated to my entrails. When he pulled it out, I felt that he took them with it and left me utterly consumed by the great love of God. The pain was so severe that it made me gasp some moans out loud. One soul is then content with nothing save God. And that is the image we see. So note, the steely tip pointed at her heart, plunged through, it's supposed to go down, pull out her stomach and her entrails, literally blood mess, painful. Literally, you're having your inside, your viscera, you're being basically what's called eviscerated. You're bloody, and look at her face. Not that pain that shows up in any capacity, but this beautiful kind of continuation almost appears like she's in orgasm. And that becomes one of the challenges that shows up as a moral issue of the week. Is it ethical for the Pope or the Roman Catholic Church to use sex to sell religion or as a product? And so this is actually a saint in meditation states honored. And this is based upon an artwork now that Marcus Albert was inspired by this artwork and did the O Project, a contemporary artist where she goes around and asks women to actually pleasure themselves. And when they do and have orgasm, she takes the moment when they're actually having that orgasm and compares that with other women around the face to show what the O Project is, or the orgasm face of the project. Now, that's what we're looking at. This really, and look at how slyly the angel here looks down as you see that face. And note, the steely tip is nowhere near her heart, which would be up here. It's way farther down much more close into the midsection that shows up. As you look at it, the illusionism of the event, it's pretty remarkable. This is trompe-l'oeil painting, so it almost looks like the natural world is opening up in every capacity up here. We have these gold lights because he drilled a window and actually has gold rays that basically in a gold gilding, so it looks like gold light coming in from the outside, almost like using it like a stained glass window. So when the clouds outside move around, this shimmers, and then he actually puts tie rods, basically rods in the middle of the sculpture, and then puts them on the wall. So when you walk around, that's why it looks like it's absolutely floating. Spectacular artwork in terms of illusionism that we're actually looking at and trying to show up. And so we have the idea of trompe-l'oeil being perfected. The light changes naturally how it's from those windows. And this is actually, he's so impressed by what he does and what he wants everyone else to do, that he puts the Coronero, the family, they have actually little areas right here where you can actually sit down and watch. And so there are no supports for this 2-ton sculpture, except for those tie rods, which still last today, which hide everything. And he beautifully wraps the cloth around it, so you actually don't see them going into the wall. Here's the trompe-l'oeil ceiling. And I say, even when you are there, it's pretty remarkable. It looks like little pockets almost of cotton that you want to go up, but this is actually all paint. You know, he overpaints the window. That's a real window. So overpaints it. So you think that actually it's delusionistic of three-dimensionality of these objects in front of the window itself. Another enormous accomplishment is the one that I'm actually in front of at St. Peter's. This is basically Bernini's response to Michelangelo's Pietà, to create a piece for Christianity that's just overwhelming. And so this particular tomb, the baldacchino, the canopy, it's 62 feet tall. And this is bronze and gold leaf going all the way up. The original columns of the size of St. Peter's are actually curved, just like the columns JC rests on after purifying the temple. So that's why we get these curvilinear, these beautiful shapes that show up within the process. You have them actually up here cleaning it in every aspect. So this beautiful shape that shows up, all gold. It's as if the angels themselves are in the process, note right here, of building the baldacchino as you walk underneath to see the tomb of St. Peter's, and it overwhelms the space. Bernini is also very famous for doing fountains. So if you ever see a fountain, they're all over Rome. This is the Four Rivers fountain. You'll see in the video that I'll show you, a Ganges has the longest oar because it was the longest navigable river that we had in the world. The Rio de la Plata is on silver coins and scared by a snake. This is from the New World. We have the idea of the Nile from Africa. His face is covered, or her face is covered. Actually, it's his. His face is covered as the source for the Nile had not been discovered yet. And the Danube touches the Pope's coat of arms, of course, because the Danube is the river that flows throughout Europe. And so that's why we actually have the relationship here. And so that's the Four Rivers fountain. Patron to keep classic. The patronage was actually by the Pamphili family, was to keep Catholics Catholic, particularly in Rome. And it's in Plaza Navona by Bernini, one of the most beautiful plazas to go. And you can actually go, here's my little guy and me playing soccer while we were there. Now, once we leave the immediate area of Rome, we're going to run into some other Italian artists, but some of the Italian artists are going to have some issues because they live farther away from Rome. And so they're not necessarily doing Reformation art or Counter Reformation art. They have basically, they live in a liminal period that where they have the ideas and the experience of both, depending on who their patron is. And the artist that is most notably notably recognized in this form is this individual here. This is Michelangelo da Caravaggio, who lives from 1571 to 1610. Note, a very short life. He is the bad boy of art. He has psychological realism. So that psychological realism is showing the reality event, but the psychology and how people would have actually felt. So he's going to use dramatic lighting, and here's a self-portrait of him, of Michelangelo da Caravaggio. Now, why is he the bad boy of art? Look at his background and his rap sheet. It's pretty amazing. He has multiple arrests for drunken street brawling, and he has a violent temper. We have at least 27 street arrests. Patrons protected him from himself. In 1606, he committed murder and fled. He's stalked by the law and is eventually executed in 1610, which we'll talk about in a moment. He changed art forever with this darkness that basically chiaroscuro on crack in some aspect called tenebrism. It's very dark that we see in horror films today. He worked outside of the Pope's reach, which what allows him to play around with some of the themes that we're going to see. He struggled with depression, probably, and the idea of death from heavy metals later on. He's the only artist who ever just ups and disappears. And I should mention that should be 1610, July 16, 1610. He's the only artist that just ups and disappears. And so he has a fight over painting after his death, and he just disappears. There's actually a Netflix documentary right now that talks about have we found Caravaggio, and of course, I'll put that up. And finally, Tenebrism, which is the supreme chiaroscuro. Now, well, actually, before we get there, the Michelangelo de Caravaggio, with the street brawling, the way that they used to handle that, and particularly for an alcoholic street brawling, which is what Michelangelo de Caravaggio used to like to do, is that he would get drunk, and then he's that drunk friend that you have that tries to fight in every kind of aspect. So that's what we're looking at. So one day he gets very, very drunk and starts fighting a guy, but they're so inebriated, and the other individual as well, that they can't actually complete the fight. They are caught by the police, and the police do what any good police officer at the time would do. He puts them in lockup. The problem, of course, is that the lockup here, that lockup is actually puts them both in the same cell. So they wake up the next morning, and they were trying to figure out, and they start piecing together the night before, and they realize that they were fighting each other. Now, in the fight for each other, what they realize is that they need to solve this fight. Michelangelo Caravaggio himself is very upset with what he has actually done, and that he did not win the battle, because he dominates. He's a big, strong, hulking, very large man for the time period. He's fighting this guy that really is very small and mouse-like and tiny. So they decide to have a masculine battle to prove which one is more masculine than the other one. And what's more masculine than a masculine battle to have than anything else? They're going to go and play sword fighting. They're going to do a gun duel. They're going to play the new sport of tennis. Love, 0, 15, 30. And this little guy is Sprite and destroys Caravaggio. And Caravaggio is not happy. So when they go to shake hands at the end of the match, Caravaggio whips out a knife and slits the guy's throat, killing him right there, forcing him to flee. And he spends the rest of his life running from the law until eventually he's caught up and beaten to a pulp that kills him, and his body just disappears. He does all this by the age of 30, transformed art. Imagine if he had lived to 82, what we might have today. It is really quite remarkable.
Professor Fraser, the next time you come to California, I want to take you out of your girls and little biceps. Are as big as your brain. Here is another one of the greatest artworks of all time by Schwarzenegger.
All right, this artwork is going to be called The Calling of Matthew. And we'll look at this in a moment. We're going to stop the video, just take a quick break as I adjust the sound quality. What? 3 o'clock? Okay. There's too much noise, so I can't work out there anymore. So I'm going to finish taping it one last thing. So this is one of those artworks, again, that has actually changed the world. Again, called The Calling of St. Matthew by Caravaggio. Now, the calling of Matthew is from 1599 to 1602, and it represents what we're actually looking at right here. Here's the story up on the right. And as Jesus passed, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the receipt of custom. And he saith unto him, Follow me. And he arose and followed him. And it came to pass, as Jesus sat in the house, behold, many publicans, tax collectors, and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. So as we think of this note, we're going to need a Jesus, we're going to need a Matthew, we're going to need someone sitting at the receipt of custom. That's a tax collector. So some of these individuals must be tax collectors that are called publicans. And so we're going to need to find out who they are. And we're also going to need a couple of disciples that show up somewhere here. So here's what I'd like you to do is look at this painting. Can you identify Jesus, St. Matthew, St. Peter, who's actually one of the people with him, the publicans, the tax collectors, and the guards? And I'll give you a moment, we'll do this in class, but I'll give you a moment to actually look through, as this painting has received some considerable controversy recently. And there's one of the blow-ups we'll look at. All right, the first thing we need to do is be able to count the number of people that show up. How many people are actually in this painting? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you actually count, the new research shows that there's probably 8 people in this painting. Again, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And if we look at a blow up of that, look, that's 3 different individuals that overlap. This is not initially interpreted as the back of their head. No, the back of his head ends right here. This is the back of someone else's head within the process. So we have a very weird feature that shows up. No, initially we would say this is Jesus, and this is what your book initially said, and will probably change in the next edition, is that look right here. That is actually the facial features that we most associate with Jesus. But think about how odd this is. Jesus walking in, looking down, not trying to make eye contact with Matthew himself. It's a very strange feature that shows up. And so when we look at these individuals here, we come up with the publicans are these individuals here. Matthew, note, is caught right in the middle of saying almost with his arm, who, and doesn't finish out the me part. And so his finger doesn't actually approach all the way him, but rather goes right next to him. Here's the young guards with their swords that are there. Likely Jesus. Don't know who this individual is. That's probably St. Peter, which is a problem itself we'll talk about. So the x-rays that we've now taken suggest that the clumsy figure of St. Peter, covering the slender youth playing the Jesus, may have been added at a later stage for dogmatic reasons. We'll talk about why that is, illustrating how the Catholic Church intermediates salvation, right? It might have been that the patron wanted him to put in St. Peter in particular, even though it's not required that that has to be the particular apostle that shows up. Now, one of the things that shows up within here, I'm looking for my cursor where I am so I can talk to you directly. I'm going to stop this for a moment. And I'm going to go back.